Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, like button, subscribe button. If you want to follow us there, it's at Ampire Media, AMPIRE. It's always much appreciated. But today, I'm joined by the voice of the Washington Commanders and ESPN 630 host Bram Weinstein as we rehash the 24-14 preseason loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. A lot to dissect, starting with the defense and the third downs in particular. Why is that still a problem? Why it remains a concern, even though it's only preseason. It's still a concern because of what they showed last year. We get into all of that. Dive into Carson Wentz. There's some really good to look at, and there are a couple of things we say, okay, maybe this is what holds him back a little bit. Is the offense better with him? Well, yes. So we get into all that as well. The offensive line, Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson, and much more. A lot to dissect. So I'm going to get right to it. By the way, you can follow Bram on Twitter at RealBramW, and you can read my work, of course, on ESPN.com. Having said all that, let's get to my conversation with the voice of the Commanders, Bram Weinstein. All right, Bram. So I think the big question is now, after these first two games, is this team going to win a game this year?
The hard-hitting questions to start it all. That one, I was completely unconcerned after the Carolina game. Like, there were some mistakes, obviously, and you expect mistakes. Yesterday wasn't great. I mean, I have not rewatched it yet, so it's really hard for me to really give a true opinion. But just in reacting off of the first quarter, that was not good. And, like Pat Mahomes did a couple of things that only he does. And so I'll take that with a grain of salt, like that crazy, off his back foot, throw back against his body play. And even like the separating play for him is when they got that redo 3rd and 10, and he's got a guy in his face and he hits, 40-yard dime to a guy in the center of the field who's not even a starting receiver. Like, those are things that he does. And that stuff, like, concerns me little, because what are you going to do about it when you're playing somebody who's that good? That said, what was he on pace for? 600 yards passing. They couldn't stop them on 3rd down. There's a lot to be concerned about, and I'm more concerned, obviously, about the defense than I am the offense, because I think there's a lot of things that were happening yesterday that I think I don't want to go too far being critical about, because they were really undermanned.
Well, and offensively, I think there are definitely more positives to build on. So we'll get to that in a minute. But let's stick with the defense, because that's the issue here. And I'm obviously being facetious when I say, ask that kind of a question. So for people listening, I was just kidding. I think they'll win games this year. But the question is, how many will they win? And it comes back to this D. And the problem is that this is what we saw last year. I think if this defense had been better in those areas, I think the panic level or the frustration level or concern level would be lower. But they weren't good there. And so that's where I'm focusing on that side of the ball too. And Ron Rivera brought up rush discipline. That was something that was an issue last year too. How big a concern is that? And do you feel like they can get that fixed?
He's vocalizing it again. Here we are at the end of camp. He's vocalizing it again. Last year, he described it with the vague term maturity. And this is what he meant, actually, that he wanted them to play within the context of their scheme using the techniques that they're trying to teach them. There was a lot of pushback and a lot of friction. Came to a head this summer with the firing of a defensive line coach in the middle of camp, which, had it happened 6 months ago, I wouldn't have been surprised one bit. Just the timing of it was unusual. So getting the message across and getting them to play within the context of the way they want them to play has been a struggle, for sure. And even when I talked to him, Coach Rivera, a few days ago before the game, he did kind of bring it up again. And so he's vocalizing this. Like, he's starting to say it again, that we're asking them to do something. We've been pushing them to do it for 2+ years. We're not getting the results that we want. And, he'll readily admit these are very singularly talented people, but they're asking them to play a certain way. They don't want them taking 2 gaps. They want them to take 1. They want them to go vertical. They do not want them to, for lack of a better word, freelance. And it's funny, like, you saw it a lot, now that he kind of brought a lot of attention to it. How many times did that 3rd-string quarterback just kind of run through gaping holes in the middle of their defense? And they were just wide gaping holes. It wasn't like he was spooked and just running. These wide gaping holes. And I think it does without, speaking for the coaches, because I'd rather hear it from them. It kind of falls in line with what they're concerned about. They have these really talented people who just aren't playing in the context of the defense that they want them to. And I'm glad yesterday didn't count because they were exposed pretty badly. And I thought it was pretty interesting that he's bringing it up again, because I've said this for a long time. And, I love all the upgrades to the offense. I think the offense should be way more competitive, should be way more explosive, should be able to score a lot more points, should be able to hold up its end of the bargain differently than in the last couple of years under Rivera. I still believe that the defense and the defensive line, that's the unit that will take this team as far as it will go. And if they're not going to be productive, or they're not going to be game changing, or they're not, at least in the eyes of the coaches, play team football the way that they want to play team football, they're going to have a problem. So, and they're going to have a problem against quarterbacks like that. Like, that's where they're going to really have a problem.
Well, and sticking with the rush discipline too, and you bring up the backups, and obviously those are backups, but some of those backups are going to have to play. Effie Obada a couple of times. I don't know if it was necessarily him, but you see guys, you see a gap created, like, well, who might be out of their lane? And there are a couple of times maybe it's him but he's less of a concern than some of those starters doing that. But the funny thing is, when on some of those third downs, I'm not even sure that it was rush discipline because Mahomes just bought time. I think there were other examples, not so much on third down, but there's also, in some cases, defensive backs not sticking to their guy tight enough. Like there was one that Keim was in coverage, and he's, it started off as zone, but you lock on your guy, and he takes a peek over here, and for Mahomes, that's all you need, because now the guy's open enough where you're going to throw that. Curl gets beat on one of those plays too, and those are guys that have to be better in those situations. But it starts with the rush. If the D line is going to be your bell cow, as they've talked about for a couple of years, they have to be better and get home a little bit more, right?
Yeah, of course. And even in the case of, like, you're bringing up those were backups. Those were their prime backups.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I mean.
This is not the classic. There were 4 or 5 guys out there
that was my point on that too. Yes, yeah.
Actually, like, that was the backups. Like, those are the guys who are going to be, defensive linemen 6 through 9 on this roster that were doing the same thing. So that's why I bring, like, I'm not going to, go after third and fourth stringers and have a hard time making the team. But like, that is what was happening. Like, the starters played a long time yesterday. Like, for the most part, they played a long time. I think the offense would have gone longer had it not been for all the injuries and the concern that went into it. But they actually played longer than I expected them to based on that. But defensively, they kept most of the starters out there. Actually, they stayed out there after Mahomes was done. So, like, this was as dress rehearsally as they could get. They played an elite team, right? A team that, like, is in the AFC Championship every single year and wins 12 games every single year. And they didn't look ready for primetime. So, and I'll hear out all the spin, about we're not showing everything, and I'll hear all of that. And the game doesn't count. I'll hear all that out too. And that, don't believe exactly what you see in the summer. Things can change in the fall. I've seen this a million times. So I'm not making any rash judgments here. But if you just go off of, they put some stock into, this is the one where we're going to play our guys a little bit longer. They played an elite team. It's a measuring stick game. They failed yesterday. I mean, there's no other way to look at that, really.
Well, and I think the other thing too, along with that, is if you're showing things that that win consistently, again, you go back to the rush discipline, you consistently show that. And listen, sometimes you get shoved out of your lane. We know that, like, it happens. But if it's happening consistently, then it becomes an issue. So that to me is more troubling than whatever the score is, because over time, consistency wins with approach and all that. When you see certain penalties happening, that's what gets you in trouble as well. And so I think that's where the frustration comes in, that you can control those more than, hey, you're not game planning or you're not doing this or that. And there were times where Mahomes just makes a Mahomes play. And so you have to live with some of those. But did you put yourself in position to defend that play? Could you do that better? And the answer in some cases is absolutely yes. And the more you do that, the better off you are. So while that's a good team, like, as you said, and I think there's some things that were troubling that came out of that because of some discipline aspects as much as anything.
Yeah. I mean, it's frustrating. It really is, because it's funny, like, a lot of these things that we were talking about last year and even the year before then, they're happening again. And again, I don't want to go too far because it's preseason, and in a week, this record will be 0-0 again. So it sounds worse than it really is, and everything's clean slate in a week and a half. But like there are things that have been overarching issues for this team and has led to it not being able to have an over 500 record the first 2 years here. Slow starts in games. They've been behind 10-0 and 14-0 to starters, right? To start both of these games. And in the case of the Chiefs, I mean, that was scary bad, actually, for a quarter, the way they were just literally walk down the field on them. And again, Mahomes did a couple things that I don't, he'll do that to everybody and it'll make you look bad. But that's largely when you're 6 for 6 on third down and you have 2 80+ yard drives and they make it look easy. And they're scoring in third down situations in the red zone. That's a little on you. That's a little on you. And they need to take responsibility for that. So they're starting slow in halves. They come out, they start slow. They've been behind in so many games the last couple of years. So here we go again with that, where they're starting slow. Same thing with the second half. They start slow in the second half. So every time they come out of the locker room, 4 halves, they start slow. The last couple of years, with slow starts that have been losses early in the season, they've dug themselves giant holes. They better not do it this time. Like, their schedule is totally set up for them for that not to happen.
Right.
So, I think what the big fear now off of seeing this for a couple of weeks is, are they going to lose to Jacksonville? Because to your point, they're going to win games. Like, I'm not worried about that. Like, the normal course for them is things tighten up, things get better, they make adjustments, but it feels a little late on the adjustment side often. And if they end up losing games to Jacksonville and Detroit, they are going to really regret it this time around. And I don't know that they're going to dig out of the hole and get to the places that they want to get to.
Well, that's been my concern with the last 2 years are the slow adjustments. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 games to discover something that you probably could have known better in the summertime, whether it's through more preseason play, whether it's just through different kind of practice, whatever, joint practices, whatever. And that it's been slow to adjust, whether it's Collins or Troy Apke a couple of years ago, et cetera. Then I think, that's where some of the concern is, to your point. And listen, all we have to go, like, you're right, in a week and a half, it's 0-0, you're looking ahead, and that's all that matters. But this is all we have to go on right now. It's another step in the process. So we have to kind of go off what we're seeing right now. And, that's where it becomes troubling. Are you concerned with the secondary, the back seven, or is it more just the front has to get it right?
Oh, man. I mean, I need to rewatch to really answer that. But Kendall Fuller's just had a great camp. Like a really, really, really great camp. He was terrific yesterday in the game and was tested over and over and over. And he stood out to me.
Yeah.
I am less concerned about the back seven than I thought I would be. I could be proven wrong about that in the season. I know Jackson had a bad penalty that gave them a second chance. On first glance, I didn't think it was that bad. But again, I haven't really rewatched it. Anyway, they called it.
You got to watch it,
whatever. It didn't feel it deserved a flag in real time, but whatever. So I am less concerned about the back seven than I am about the front. I really feel like the pressure needs to be put on those guys. Like that's going to be the group that's going to determine whether they're a good defense or not. They need to be disruptive and they need to make plays. And I don't see a lot of it here. And and I'm not going to blame not having Chase Young for it. Like they need to.
Montez Sweat is talented for them, right? Montez Sweat is talented with or without Chase Young out there.
Right.
If you want
so is Payne.
Right. If you want a big contract, you can survive without Chase Young being on the other side. You can still make plays, and I think that's what they have to get to. I mean, nobody looks better coming off the bus than Montez Sweat, right? The way he runs, and moving, and not just put all on him, but he's a guy that can be a playmaker for them. And so I think that has to get done. What about the linebackers?
I think Jamin Davis is getting better, actually. I'll have to rewatch to look at him, but I think he's getting better. I thought the way Jack Del Rio described it when he met with the media earlier this week was pretty apt in what I've kind of seen. Like, he's just like, it's coming faster to him. Like, it's clearly coming faster to him. He is where he needs to be, more often than not, where he's flashing on the screen a little bit more now. And so I think that's a really good positive development. I think there was a lot of concern. It still should be at the linebacker position. But actually, through the first couple of weeks of the preseason, I kind of like Holcomb and Davis. And I think that those two have shown up, and I feel a little better about the position there. I still think they don't have much depth, obviously, so an injury could be devastating for them. And, when Holcomb gets caught in coverage with really good tight ends or really good running backs, it's going to be a problem. And that's just, I think that's, if the coaches are expecting him to be really good at that, I think that's a hard ask, I think, for him. But when it comes to, the responsibilities of playing the position, I am less concerned than I was going into the season. And with Davis, I see him making plays now. And so I think it's coming along for him. And, if he becomes an impact player, it's a big deal for them.
He had a couple nice stops in the hole yesterday, filled it pretty well. He also had one time where it was like a 12-yard completion, something like that, inside the red zone where the running back comes out. He starts to rush. It looks like he hesitates because I don't know if he's supposed to take the back or rush, but he got caught in between mentally, and he kind of hesitated, kept rushing a little bit more, but not full out, and the running back leaks for an easy pickup that looked like it was his guy. And so, but that was one thing that on the negative side for him, but I did see him filling the hole a lot better, continuing to fill that better. So, I think with the secondary, Derek Forrest, I think, has done a nice job when he's been in there. And I think that, and he's done a nice job in special teams as the punt protector. So I think, and he's usually one of the first guys down covering the punt. So I think he's going to help as probably another DeShays or Everett type. So I think that's been a positive back there. Still concerned about the secondary depth, but that's injuries. Let's flip to the offensive side of the ball and the starters. Couple nice drives going, couldn't convert on third down. What did you think?
Yeah, I think that's the missed opportunities of yesterday. Was the offense was, how many times were they in Kansas City territory and punted?
They were right around midfield 3 times on the starters.
Yeah. So I think that there's something there to look at and find out what's going on there. I will say, like, just overall, again, while the results weren't there with scoring, which is a disappointment, I do feel like Wentz is kind of in control here. And, while I'm not really sure how much they're showing, and I think that's a good thing for them, honestly, because, like, why would you show what you're going to do when you have so many different pieces? The parts that they are working on seem to be comfortable for him. Like, all the stuff, kind of the wild, like, oh man, he's going to be all over the place, or he has no confidence, or he's going to look terrible. I don't see any of that. Like, you can nitpick a lot of things, and we can do that here if you want to, but just largely a comfort level part of it, I actually feel pretty good through a couple of weeks for him, albeit with not much in terms of results. And yesterday, what's disappointing, and like not unlike I would say about the Carolina game, where if you went and looked at the stats, like, and it's so hard to do this because it's a preseason game and all these different people play, but if you went and looked at the stats of the Carolina game, they gave up 288 yards in total. The Carolina quarterbacks were 17 of 38. They rushed 30 times for 90 yards. Like, these are all like winning metrics, huge winning metrics. But they turned the ball over 2 times. They had a bunch of penalties, and they lost. Like, that's how they lost, like, realistically. In this one, like, I would look back and go, the defense is going to have a hard time stopping Kansas City in general because it's Pat Mahomes in Kansas City, and they were getting lit up. If you can't convert third downs on the opposite side of the 50 and you're punting the ball, you will lose. So the situational football part of this for the first couple of weeks, there's a lot left to be desired for sure. But if you're just like, is this guy comfortable? Does he look like, he's going to play a little more like the guy we remember in Philadelphia and a little less like the guy we heard about in Indianapolis? I feel actually pretty good. And I did think the one thing I thought that was interesting that they did a lot of yesterday was they purposefully put him under center, like over and over and over and over and over. So clearly they want to work with that aspect of his game for this particular team. And I agree with it because he is really good pre-snap with ball fakes, and putting him under center, I think, gives them a look of, are they going to run or are they going to throw, and gives him some comfort level as they kind of shift around the running back room a little bit. So I actually thought, like, last week I saw we're going to put Curtis Samuel in motion constantly and see if that helps him, I think. in terms of pre-snap read. And this week, point of emphasis was put him under center and run plays out of it and start to get comfortable in real time doing it from that formation.
Play action is going to be that's going to be a key there.
He's
so
very good at play action, very good at ball fakes, very good at getting the ball out very fast. Like that's the stuff last year that I watched when people were complaining about him, where I'm like, he was excellent at that stuff. And so clearly there are that's the glorified practice of part of it that I saw yesterday. They just did it so many times that it was obvious that that was something they wanted to work on.
And I think his comfort level is definitely growing. I think he's starting to develop more of a connection with Terry McLaurin. He had that one nice 18-yard ball over the middle where he throws to a spot in zone coverage, thrown to a spot, and McLaurin is there. So you see McLaurin, as soon as McLaurin it's a deep dig, cuts inside, and ball's coming, right? And it was there. And so that's where you start to see it. What we saw yesterday, too, with him is there are a couple of things that I think hurt that shouldn't say hurt, but some of his flaws show up. So if you remember, he sails the ball to Gibson, right?
Yep.
On that little out. Gibson is there, but he doesn't. And this is one thing I know is if he doesn't transfer his weight, that ball's going high. And on this one, it was all back. It was no weight transfer. Ball goes up, goes over his head. Missed opportunity with that one. Curtis Samuel, the one where you remember the bootleg rollout gets to Samuel. I would like to have seen him get rid of that ball quicker because Curtis,
he was late with that.
Right. The corner on that side is retreating. Mm-hmm. You see that now you get maybe a first down, 5 yards, but you're still okay.
That one felt like he wanted to take a shot, realized it wasn't there, got it to Samuel a little bit late, and just didn't maximize the play. But I agree with you. In real time, it was, had he gotten that out of his hands, that's first down for sure.
Right. And that, again, some of this is nitpicking because I think that by and large, he's going to be a good quarterback for them, better than what they've had.
I agree.
Said that. So I'm not worried about that. And some of this is nitpicking, but then the sack was another example where it's a 2-man route and it's not open down the field. And you've got Gibson for 6 yards. Get that 6-7 yards back, get a field goal, protect the points, and get something on the board. But then it's like try to extend the play, and then the DN spins off of the double team, and boom, he's done. So, but that's another one where, again, like you got, and he even said this: protect those points. He knows that he shouldn't have taken the sack there, but that's when where people say, does he hold the ball too long? Is that an example of that where you have the check down and but he's looking for the first down or the bigger play.
Yeah.
And then, again, I don't know.
I saw a lot of it last year where I felt like he held the ball a tick too long, a lot. It got him in trouble. And that's why, I think from the get-go, we started talking about this stuff months ago. Like the slow developing stuff to me is where you potentially put yourself in danger with him. Because he is apt to hold on to it, maybe a second longer than he should. And whether that's a internal timing thing that he could work on a little bit, that all the really good quarterbacks have, they know they've got to get rid of it at this specific point in time, or whether, he does have some ability that a lot of quarterbacks don't. I think he knows this, and he feels like he can buy himself a little bit more time. I have found in recent years in watching him that's gotten him in more trouble than it's been successful. But I do want to I think it's worth pointing out here, because what was it last week? We were talking to some of our colleagues, and, they were talking about, him, and there's just this kind of overarching, he was really bad in Indianapolis, thing that just kind of keeps percolating up when we talk about him. And if they don't have success, and I'm sitting there going, the guy threw 27 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. He did not have a bad season. Was he great? No. Was he Pro Bowl? No. All these things we're talking about, was he a little late with the ball? Was he inaccurate at times? Yeah. And those are the concerning things about him. But this kind of overarching, he's terrible thing, I don't know. I don't understand where it came from. And even through the, wonkiness of the first couple of weeks of camp, I don't know how anyone's still coming to that conclusion right now. They're better with him,
definitely.
Considerably better with him. Definitely. Is he perfect? No. Does he look like he's going to be a top 5 quarterback right now? No, but he makes them way better, way more explosive, and they are holding a ton back right now.
Yes.
So until we see it in the first few weeks, it's just so hard for me to come to any other conclusion than I actually feel more comfortable with him than I did at the start of camp or the first couple of weeks of camp, where there was just a lot of inaccuracy in practice and it got me worried.
Right. And I acknowledge that what the stuff I'm picking at is what keeps him out of the top 10 right now.
Yeah.
Those 3 plays.
Yes.
He's still a definite upgrade for them, and he still makes them better. And there are plenty of examples where it's like, that's just a good throw. He has some times where he's looking left and he's coming back, working back, and he's side arming it almost to Armani Rogers, and he picked up that little crosser underneath, a little bit high, but Rogers makes a nice grab, and it's a good job by Wentz getting around under. It wasn't complete duress, but he can get around quick and gets that quick twitch out. And he did that last week, and he showed it again this week. That's an example of where that special arm talent comes in, is that you see that with him. So he's definitely an upgrade. And like I said, I think the encouraging thing to me is the connection that he has, that he's developing with McLaurin. And the other thing, too, is what that arm does, like that little tunnel screen to McLaurin. Because he gets it out there so fast, the defense has a harder time getting to. It gives you an extra yard or two of cushion to make a move and get yards after the catch. And you saw that on like that little tunnel screen to McLaurin, that he gets yards after the catch in part because of Wentz's arm. So just to be clear with people, when you talk about this, there are things that hold him back a little bit and things he does very well. And I agree with you. It's almost like people think he was Nathan Peterman, for God's sake.
Right. They talk about it like he was terrible last, like that's become like this overarching thing. And that was never the case. Like I was nitpicking him to death off of what he did. And I'll, reiterate all the things that I'm concerned about. And some of the stuff about holding the ball a little bit too long or doing some of the Pat Mahomes-y things that only Pat Mahomes does well. And that's why he's Pat Mahomes. But Wentz tries some of that stuff. All that stuff is concerning to me. But it doesn't change the fact that on like the level of capability and the level of possibility with him, he's a massive upgrade from what they've had. And it's clear as day when you watch it. And then, lastly on him, and I know we're not talking about this, but it needs to be said every time I hear this. The guy's a hard worker. He's a good teammate. And by all experience that I've had with him so far, seems to be like a really good person who does relate to people. So all of this character assassination, because it came up again with Jim Irsay, unsolicited, saying things about him holding them back, and that got in the news cycles again. This guy has been just completely assassinated. His character's been assassinated, and I haven't seen a whiff of any of that. And maybe like they also haven't lost a real game yet. So let's see how it goes when they lose a real game. I haven't seen any of this. So I'm really, I'm at the point now where I'm starting to get defensive of him because I don't see a bad player. I'm hoping he can be a great player, but he's not there right now. I didn't even think he would acknowledge that at this point. But all this other stuff that's said about him, it just feels, at least in our limited experience with him, just not who he is and not true. And so, I'm kind of callousing up now. Like I don't know what's going on here. I don't know what happened last year. But they did him wrong on the way out is the way I feel about it at this point.
Irsay I'm a little, I don't know if Wentz is living rent-free in his head or what, but like the fact that he keeps bringing it up and I know people ask a guy about it and he's going to answer, but at some point I would just say, listen, we've moved on. But it's like, it does feel like not going out of the way, but certainly unafraid to continue whatever he wants to say about him. And he just
wants to blame him for them not making the playoffs. Yeah. Like, I don't get it. I've never seen anything like this. It's the owner doing it too. It's really weird. Like it's really, really, really weird. And I don't know. Like, I don't know what, only they know what it is. But then all I can do is go back and watch them. And I'm like, that guy was 9-3 at one point in the middle of the season. He wasn't bad. Like, what are you talking about? Like, again, like, he's not a bust quarterback. He didn't have 7 touchdowns and 13 picks. Like, what are you talking about?
Right. And so let's move on a little bit because the O-line, it's funny because one of the reasons he wasn't going to play more was because the O-line, he's missing basically 3, there's 2 starting guards, and then Charles Leonard was out because for a medical thing. I don't know if he was just sick or what, but minor thing from what we understand. But so you're missing 3 stars on the line. I thought they did a pretty good job of protecting him. I thought, I know you haven't had a chance to watch, but like when I'm watching Sadiq Charles, I thought you did a nice job. And that's, to me, is an encouraging thing if that kid can stay healthy. Because he's got the talent to take over at some point. And I think with these guards, he's going to need to play more. But what did you think of the line in general?
I was very nervous
Yeah.
about that
Yeah.
yesterday. And I think it just derailed everything that they wanted to do, at least initially, which was they were going to play everybody for a half. And there was just no way that they felt comfortable between the line and the tight ends. This guy, Aaron Montero, who is all of a sudden thrust into a starting position and played both guards yesterday for practically the entire game because they're out of people. I thought did a pretty good job. There was one glaring one in the second half, but he was playing the whole game, like as someone who's deep on the bench. Lucas has barely practiced and was playing left tackle, and they had him on a pitch count. Roulier's making his debut, and they got him on a pitch count. We saw Cosme practicing at guard in the middle of the week because they're running out of people.
Nobody.
And they're running out of people. So I think they got through. I hope the Leno thing is not serious. I hope the Schweitzer thing is not serious. I hope Norwell comes back soon, because if they don't, there's going to have to be a contingency plan. When I asked Rivera about it last week, he said they're not there yet with that. But there's no way they're not thinking about it because there's just too much attrition. But to your point, I actually felt like they protected pretty well.
Yeah.
They actually ran the ball pretty well. And the Matsko magic continues because I don't know how they did it, frankly. That was a terrible matchup for them yesterday.
But that's what I'm saying. So, that was, but again, I've never worried about their depth up front, but they've got to keep guys healthy. And it is concerning that Norwell and Turner are not out there, and neither is Wes Schweitzer, because you get to the regular season and you don't want to be going with this guard tandem. Although, like I said, I was encouraged by what I saw from Sadiq Charles. Let's see if that continues. What about Brian Robinson?
Looked good. I don't know that we have a running back controversy, but it is certainly arrows pointing up on 8, getting the majority of rushes when we go into kind of a standard operating procedure offense. You saw how they utilized Gibson in space, and I think in space, he might be their best performer. So maybe they've just come around to, it feels like we're just done trying to figure out how to make him a productive, consistent inside the tackle rusher. We are going to use him. He is going to be a big part of all the things that we do, but we drafted a guy who has the pedigree to do this. So I think we're just kind of seeing this in real time. I didn't expect this to happen. I think that's why it caught us all off guard. And that fumble seems to have gotten a little bit of throw your hands up from the staff, and they've just decided we don't trust him that way. And they know that he's too important and too good of an impact player to not have him on the field. So he's going to play, and he's going to play a lot, and he's going to have carries, like any other running back would. But it's pretty clear now that the ship is sailing on the idea that Brian Robinson's going to carry a small amount of the load. He's not. I think that's been exposed here.
Well, what I like about Robinson especially is, first of all, when he's going through the hole, watch him, 2 hands covering the ball, and he's lower, right? So you're coming at his shoulders, and he does that consistently, always leaning forward. And I love that because he's not going to be explosive, but if you can get that 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 yards consistently, then you're consistently putting yourself in good situations. And I think that's what he does. There was one time with Gibson too, and I still like Gibson. I still think he can help in space and all that. But one of the things that troubled them last year that I remember talking to coaches about is that if you see a defensive back in the hole, attack them. Don't turn away from them and try and go outside. And his first carry yesterday was a -1, and he's going to the outside 32. Safety's up in the hole, but it's kind of a bigger hole. Lower your shoulder and just go at him. Get 3 or 4 yards. But he tried to bounce wide, and the tight ends are, Wolf and Rogers have the double team, comes off and makes a stop for -1. You could have had 3 or 4, and that's the kind of run that they want to see, and that's what Robinson has done consistently. So I think that's a difference. But Gibson in space, they can motion him out of the backfield. They like him in the backfield. I know everybody said, he was a receiver in college. He would have been a raw talent at receiver, but using him as a weapon out of the backfield in that role can be very good for you. And, they didn't have McKissick yesterday, so he's handling that role. So I still think he can play, but I think Robinson's consistency will be the difference for this staff. Anything else jump out of you? Armani, your guy Armani Rogers, to me, just keeps getting better.
Yeah, I think. Well, they had to lean on him. I mean, they had no choice. That was as thin as it could possibly get, and they were nervous.
Yeah,
Frankly, the coaches told me they were nervous about how much they were going to, lean on Rodgers and Eli Wolf to play because that's
yeah,
it. That's all they had. So let's see where the injury situation is with some of these other guys for this week. I have a feeling you're going to hear a couple of veteran names come in, if for nothing else, to get through this Ravens game, so that they have enough able bodies to do it. Um, and listen, I think he's a great camp story. Like, the guy was a quarterback in college. They're converting him. He caught my eye early. He's very smooth when he runs. He clearly kind of gets it. He's just a football player. I'd have to ask the coaches about the blocking part of it, because I'm sure that is quite a transition to the NFL for him. But when it comes down to the idea of, can he be a viable option as a tight end, he looks the part to me.
yeah.
And at this point, considering what's happened, it feels very likely he's going to make the team. I mean, I've heard nothing about Logan Thomas coming back anytime soon. So hopefully Bates is healthy and is their number one. Hopefully Cole Turner gets to play a little bit here and we find out, what he's about when we get him in some real games. But right now, I'd say Rodgers is, at this juncture, a lock to make the team as the third until Thomas can come back.
I liked what I saw from Rodgers in the blocking game yesterday, and I think he's done it. I think he has steadily improved there, and I like his chances a lot now to make this roster just because of his improvement there, because that was the key. We know he runs well, and there's some details of routes that I'm sure he's got to get better at. But the blocking I felt like was good. Those sift blocks behind the line, does a nice job there, and I felt like even at the line he did a good job of working his feet to get an advantage on some guys. That was an improvement to me. So that was good to see in that regard. So, the other thing, last thing too, the one thing offensively, you're right. Like, I've heard this past week, like, you guys, basically, they've shown us nothing in camp what they're going to do. In those last couple of weeks when the practices are closed to the media is when they're going to start to put in a lot of stuff that we'll see in the regular season. And so I'll be curious to see how much it changes. Then it's going to change too when you do get a Logan Thomas back and J.D. McKissick is back. When he wasn't there yesterday, but is he a part of the offense with Thomas out there? It changes things for this offense. So I'll be curious to see where it goes. I'm more encouraged by what we've seen there than by what we haven't seen. And the last thing on defense, Bram, no turnovers. This group needs to start forcing more. They don't. It's one thing to be bad on third down. They don't force turnovers either. It's not a good combo.
No.
I think they really need to start building something on that side of the ball. And I don't know, fans will debate coaching and doing all that, but they've got to. They have players there. They've got to start making some plays. Well, thanks, Bram, for coming on, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back on Monday with another practice report. I'll talk to you next time.